Are you looking for a podcast where you can hear from real people regarding their real dental drama? If so, then you've come to the right place. Join hosts Bethany Petty and Dr. Rena Kuba as we dive into the solutions we've created and the mistakes we've made while managing dental drama. Let's get started.
So I'm going to kick off. Hello, hi, greetings, etc. here. I wanted to talk about, because I know we talked about last time, and I was hoping we could kind of like split this up into maybe a 3-part series here, because we were talking about last time patients and their smoke signals, and they're about to explode. And before that, we were talking about, an episode before that, we were talking about our employee burnout.
Yes.
Because I feel like this is very relevant. Even in Time Magazine here, this last January 5th through 9th, kind of that not episode, that edition, whatever the word would be, that magazine, they have a whole section on happiness. And like, so there's like 5 or 6 articles. If you look it up if you Google happiness Time Magazine, you'll find it. And the problem is, I think they'll let you look at one for free. Okay. But anyway, I have the magazine and I was looking through that, and it was talking about all of these kinds of things about burning out on for yourself, and then just other happiness themes. Yeah. So it was I feel like if Time Magazine's talking about it too, and here we're dealing with it in our offices, like that's what you're having to coach a lot of your clients with. So we've talked about the patient burnout, the staff burnout. We started talking about patient burnout, and then we kind of ran out of time because to me, okay, so we've identified, or we know that patients are going to send smoke signals. So I guess that wouldn't really be patient burnout per se, but it could cause the employee burnout dealing with enough of those patients.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yes, but in those other podcasts, we were talking about how that is one thing that colleagues of ours, clients of yours are talking about, like these really angry patients. And we've talked previously about de-escalation and how, all of that. So I kind of wanted to right now segue into, again, last time we talked about the fact that patients can go crazy on you and have these unrealistic expectations. I think last time we talked about the patient that, never confirmed anything and then got really upset when their appointment wasn't held, even though the office said, we're not going to hold your appointment. They claimed they didn't get the message, just assumed that they were going to be taken care of. And I think we talked last time too about how some things we could do is make sure you have a backup and in case the patient does show up, which I think that office didn't do. I wanted to get into a little bit more today about maybe even some resources for us that we could pass on to our staffs or train with our staffs about what can we be looking for. So in that example, that patient, we should have expected that patient to show up upset if they showed up. We should have expected that they would not be happy. And I don't think this office was prepared for that. They just were like, well, we canceled it, and assuming the patient got it, and that was that. And so that was the big misstep there, is that you should have thought through that and gone, okay, if this patient does show up, clearly they're going to be upset. They're not going to go, oh, oops, silly me, I didn't listen to my messages. Sorry, I'll reschedule. Like, that's not going to happen. Right. So in other scenarios, what are things that we can do? What are we looking for? I guess is my question. What are we looking for that we ourselves can go, uh-oh, hold up a minute here. This is about to explode. Because I think we all have that in our office where we're not quite prepared. We didn't read the room right. We didn't read the patient right. We didn't read the scenario right. It's a game of operator. It's what my assistant told me. And then I walk into the room and that's not at all what the parent was upset about. The assistant kind of didn't catch it right. The person on the front desk didn't. I didn't. Maybe I didn't read the signals that the parent was saying. I leave the room, the parent's upset and, has the head of the assistant now because the doctor wasn't listening. So anyway, I guess the question is, can we dive into what are we looking for? Yeah. What are the smoke signals? Yeah, I want some practical points. Yes, before somebody blows.
Well, and I think one of the things that you and I talked about too is carving out time to train on. So I'm hoping that
primarily dentists and practice owners are our listeners and followers here, I'm hoping that we'll be able to provide just some practical tips that they can turn around and just train team members on. So first of all, I do think there are smoke signals. A lot of times what team members will communicate to the doctor is, holy moly, this person just blew up out of nowhere and we don't even know what happened. And what I've found is that oftentimes they missed signals leading up to that. So I think we all have to be very observant. We have to kind of watch for these things, which is where your team comes into play. So sometimes we'll get doctors or practice owners that are just like, oh, get that patient out of here. They blew up at my, team member unprovoked, just went after her. And I'm like, yeah, not that can't happen. But we probably missed some signs where we could have rerouted that patient in that moment. So you and I have actually trained on this. I think body language is one of our first signs that a patient is getting upset. So most of the time we wear our tension or our feelings in our body. So that can be, and we should be watching for it anyway, that can be those clenched jaws, just looking over, and they may not be showing anger on their face, but their jaw is clenched and you can see that tightness in their jaw. And you're like, that's not normal. Shouldn't be like that.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick.
Yeah.
What about the mask? I guess you'll get to other things, like if the mask is hiding that.
Yeah, that's
Sorry.
true.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah, so this would be an unmasked patient, obviously, because you would be able to see the jaw. I think that's one of the first signs. Some people will show frustration even in their skin color before they actually blow up. Actually, a lot of people do this. Their throat will get red or their cheeks will become flushed. So they start having coloring in their face that shows, hey, something's going on here. Sometimes it's just they were talkative and they said a lot and they had a lot of facial expressions when they first came in. And now all of a sudden there's no facial expressions, or they've stopped talking. They've quieted down. I was trying to think about a gentleman in your office not too long ago that had kind of an explosion in your office, and the team had a really hard time reading it because he was quiet. He wasn't verbalizing his frustration. He was just quiet, and nobody picked up on some of the body language that said, I'm frustrated. Obviously, the typical signs of crossing arms, kind of glaring or having very direct eye contact. So most of the time when people are frustrated, they're not going to be distracted on their phones or doing anything else. They're fully into that moment. So it could be the opposite. Maybe you had somebody that was talkative that now got quiet. Well, now you've got somebody that was just happily on their phone and all of a sudden they're not. And they're much more direct in looking at you and talking to you. So those are some physical symptoms. And then I want to talk about voice symptoms as well. But can you think of any other physical symptoms before I move on from that?
I was going to say kind of opposite of what you said about the phone. Like sometimes we'll see somebody who's just kind of sitting there and then they get annoyed and then suddenly they're on their phone and they kind of like shoulders bunch in and now they're tapping away on their phone or they're mumbling to themselves on their phone. And you're like, what just happened here?
That's a really good point. How they're on their phone. Watching for that as well, because if they're seeming super aggressive in messaging or even getting on a phone call with somebody, that will surely give it away. One thing that I would say to be cautious of is when you start seeing pacing. Pacing is always a sign that when I see it in an office, I personally start to get nervous, because normally an angry person doesn't pace. An agitated person paces, meaning they've got so much anger and emotion in their body that they literally can't stand still, or sit. So that they may actually pop up out of the chair if they're the patient, if they're a companion or a parent in the room. If they were seated, they might stand up and start moving. There's just a lot of movement. And anytime we get to that stage, we've normally missed the point where we could have turned it around. Now they're to a point where we actually have to, as awful as it sounds, we almost have to treat them like they're a psychological case in that moment. meaning all of our normal de-escalation strategies that we're going to talk about here likely won't work for that person because they're in truly an agitated state. It's a psychological state where words don't help. Nothing helps. We just have to get them calmed back down by changing the energy in the room. So a lot of what we're going to talk about doesn't apply to the agitated person, the one that is truly like lava going everywhere. And the first sign of that is pacing. And then normally that pacing is followed by very loud communication of their displeasure. Maybe not yelling, but talking very forcefully. And we can't, let's say we don't know, like maybe is this person agitated or not? If you'll say, hey, come over here and have a seat, and they react very badly to that, they're like, I'm not sitting down, blah, 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 or they physically can't sit down, they're in an agitated state. So I do want to kind of put that as a precursor to everything that we're going to talk about. What we're talking about today is not the agitated patient. We're talking about the one is throwing off smoke signals that they're angry. How can we get them to de-escalate so that they don't get to that agitated state?
That is so interesting. I've never heard about pacing, and now I'm trying to go, have I ever seen a pacer and missed it? And I don't know. I don't think I have. But that sounds awfully terrible.
It is.
That sounds awful.
I know. And they have trouble in that agitated state. They have trouble making eye contact because they're just... The way to think of it is they're in a different realm, emotionally, psychologically, and it's what I would call the dangerous realm. We don't want a patient to get to that point because oftentimes they can't bring themselves back down.
Have you seen this? Have you seen this in offices?
I saw it in an office a couple months ago, yes.
Whew, okay.
And it was terrifying. It was terrifying to me because I've done enough research on this state to realize that it's a scary state for a patient to be in. But I realized in that
For the patient to be in, or for the rest of us to be in?
Both. It's dangerous for both.
All right.
But it was scary for me. This particular man was out in a lobby or a waiting room. And I, out of the corner of my eye, started seeing the pacing. And the team, this is very common. The team is not recognizing that something's off. So the man was standing when I went up to the front desk. So I noticed right away he's standing. And I didn't really pay attention, didn't ask any questions about it. But once I saw him, he came up and said something to the ladies at the front desk. And when he stepped away from the front desk, he started pacing back and forth. And I started trying to problem solve. I was like, we've got to get this under control. And everybody's looking at me like, I think he's going to be fine. I'm like, no, he's not. So once he did get back to the hygiene room, he wouldn't sit. He was it's operatories, they're small. He was almost towering over the hygienist, who was kind of stuck because it's an operatory. She led him into the room. Now she's cornered essentially in that room. And he was talking very loud, expressing all of his displeasure.
And she probably had no clue because she didn't watch him pace and probably...
Well,
was it an insurance issue or what?
No.
Okay.
He was mad that he was being seated literally a few minutes late for his appointment.
Okay.
It was minutes. It was literally minutes. So I had given her a heads up because the patient before was kind of lingering in the operatory talking to the doctor. So I realized the doctor and the hygienist are unaware that this guy is coming unglued. And so I kind of motioned to her to come out, and I said, listen, your patient needs to get seated as quickly as possible. Because the key thing is his biggest need in that moment was, I need to be seated. And he was very angry that there was a few minutes. It was one of those weird things where people had arrived after him and they were seated before him, but he was a few minutes past his appointment time. It wasn't like it was super late. And so I just let her know we need to seat him as quickly as possible. And so she was able to kind of encourage the doctor and the patient out of the room, try to quickly, turn around the room. The key thing is you want to give them whatever they're asking for, which sounds crazy. You're like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be bullied into that. when you're dealing with an agitated patient, yes, you are, because that is one of the things that kind of brings them down. You apologize for everything, and you keep your tone very monotone, and your body language, you don't use any body language. You have a very quiet. So what you're trying to do is lower the energy in the room to where there's none. So if your voice inflects in a certain way, it can light a match under that person. So you stay very monotone. Actually, you don't have any eye contact. You avoid eye contact because eye contact actually creates energy. And so you can look like right below their chin, or you can look at their belly, but you have a very calm body and a very monotone voice, and then no eye contact. And then you just keep saying things like, I understand, I'm so sorry. Yes, I'm so sorry, which is totally opposite of what we would do with an angry patient, because there's some reasoning there that we have with an angry patient. With an agitated patient, essentially, you want their body language to start to calm down before you ever try to engage in a conversation. The logic, the more we talk, the more energy we can actually put into the room. So you just want to, I'm so sorry. Yes, I understand. That's so frustrating, blah, 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 over and over and over again. Not looking at them, looking at their belly, or looking kind of at their shoulder, not in their eyes. And then you stay super still. And then one of the things I always say is people don't need to be coming in and out of the room at all. Even if it's like, I'm uncomfortable in this situation, the second we insert somebody new into the room, it changes the energy just with the movement of that person stepping in, and it can inflame that person again. So when you see that happen, that person that is in the conversation should be the only one. And then eventually, if we will keep our energy low and just monotone, I'm sorry, eventually you'll see the patient kind of settle down. They might be able to sit down. And then that means they've moved out of that agitated state into the angry state, which is where we can actually reason with them and come to a solution.
Man, like all of this just makes me go, I just want to be like, where's the eject button? Like, don't come back. That sounds crazy.
I know.
And it's funny, even the verbiage of that, or the title of it, like, I would think it would be an angry patient versus, like, to me, agitated doesn't seem as intense as angry. So you're saying you're taking the agitated down to angry, and I'm like, good Lord, so we're not even done yet? Like, wow.
No, it was interesting to watch this one unfold, because once he got into the room, as a true agitated patient, he wouldn't sit down. So I knew, okay.
Which is absurd to me. You're upset that you didn't get to sit down, and you want your cleaning going, but now you won't sit down to get your cleaning.
Because he can't even reason.
Wow.
The logic is out in that moment. And so thankfully, the hygienist and again, she hasn't been trained on this. You better bet your booty the next team meeting we had, I was like, all right, we're training on this. But she is one of the calmest, sweetest, just even keeled. We always talk about how she can walk in the door, her world will be falling apart. She's got a lot of drama on the outside, and you would never know it. This girl is put together and calm. And so it ended up being the perfect pair for this gentleman, because she did exactly what her nature is, which is, I understand. Yes, I'm so sorry. He was way taller than her, so she was not looking him in the eye just because of, he's literally inches from her. She couldn't look him in the eye. And so thankfully I was watching very closely, and I was like, I think it's actually going to be fine because of her. And then just the way, the physical nature of how they had to stand in that moment, it was exactly what it needed to be. And within about 5-7 minutes, which seems like a very long time.
That's ridiculous. Yes.
But she just kept saying, I'm so sorry. Yes, I understand. Yes, I understand. Blah, blah, blah. Eventually you could see him. His shoulders kind of started to relax. And she asked him, would you like to have a seat so we can get started? And he sat down. And I was like, okay, we're good to go. So I think it was just, thank goodness, blessings from above, that it all worked out the way that it needed to.
So, and I know that's not the point of this podcast here today, but I got to just know, then, like, for future, though, like, yeah. I wouldn't want to see this patient again. I'm like, you're this volatile lava, like, volcano waiting to explode.
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked that question, though. So once in an agitated state doesn't mean they're always in an agitated state.
But you never know when they're coming back in an agitated state.
You never know. But in today's age, it's very common. I mean, again, a third of people are dealing with depression and anxiety. So we're going to have more of this. And yes, could we dismiss all of those patients? Maybe, but we never know when it's going to hit, or we never know what happened outside of the office to him stepping into the office. There's so much that comes into this. Was it truly the appointment that he was upset about? No. Obviously something else was going on, but in that moment, they just...
Well, it makes me think about staff could do that to us too.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, that is I do think it's important to mention those signs in this, because oftentimes we would try to approach that person with a logical kind of calming down, and any kind of logic is not going to work in that scenario. So if you do spot an agitated patient, and that's always marked by either pacing, standing, some sort of movement, they can't stay still, and they have trouble making eye contact, then you know, okay, I've got to just throw all logic out. We're always like, well, I'm not going to apologize for something I didn't do. I mean, he was seated a few minutes late. Come on. But in this particular moment, I'm sorry. That's so frustrating. Yes, blah, blah, blah. Just very calmly to get them back down. With an angry patient, they're not going to pace. They're not going to not sit down for you. For the most part, an angry patient is going to either show you with their body that they're angry, or they're going to start speaking, and when they start speaking, you're going to realize, oh, okay, they're angry. So a couple of signs, we talked about body language, but a couple of signs with, it's another form of body language, nonverbal, is the tone of voice. So we need to listen for volume changes, so they can start speaking more. Usually it's louder is when somebody's angry, they kind of increase their volume, or they'll start speaking in faster, shorter sentences. And you've probably heard this multiple times, where they go from just normal conversation to all of a sudden they've got very direct questions. They're short, choppy sentences, and they're getting louder as they ask those questions. A lot of the times when the staff is normally picking up on it is they ask questions in a way that's very finger pointing. Like, what do you mean you didn't know my insurance, blah, blah, blah. You're telling me you blah, 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 blah. So they'll ask questions in a very I kind of picture just like a big old pointer finger, like, this is on you. And that's normally when the team recognizes, oh gosh, this person is angry. But before that, we should spot body language, and we should spot tone of voice starting to change. We can still settle somebody once they get to that, rapid fire questioning. We can still settle them, but oftentimes it's going to take us longer once they get to that stage to get them settled back down. What do you feel like are some of the tips for staff members when they spot these early warning signs, body language or tone of voice, and they're like, it could just be gut feeling too. It could just be like, I don't know, something's off in this room. I can't really put my finger on it, but I feel like something's going on. And I would say, trust your gut. What's it going to hurt if you kind of treat it like an angry patient and approach it in that way? It's not going to hurt anything. Might as well kind of trust your gut on that, even if the physical signs aren't there. But once the team members know, okay, this person's angry, what are some of the things that you would suggest for team members to do to de-escalate?
I definitely think recognition of and trying to maybe clarify or ensure that they're understanding it properly, because I feel like we had one receptionist once, and she was constantly making it seem like she was the one that was being, victimized by our patients. And then when I started paying attention, I was like, but you're not listening to them. You are repeating over and over again. Like if they were saying, I don't have a copay because, Aetna is my secondary. And she's like, you do have a copay because so-and-so is your primary. Like, I'm just using that as a stupid example. I don't have a thorough one, but in the end, I'm like, but are you listening to what the patient's saying? Because if you were listening deeper, And it's like she was so defensive that she would be the one. And of course, then everybody would end up angry because the patient's like, you didn't understand my question to begin with. And whether that's literally not understanding because I've got a lot of foreign patients in my office. So did you not understand the accent? Or maybe their verbiage is a little different. We laugh about this in our office, but for years, we'd talk about crowding, like kids in mixed dentition, and we talk about crowding in the orthodontic visit and, spend 4 or 5 minutes going over x-rays and crowding in phase 1. And, this is why we're sending you to the orthodontist. And the parent would go, And then at the end, they'd be like, oh, okay, so do you have any other questions? Yes. I wanted to know what we're going to do about, the arrangement of these teeth, the alignment. And it was just defeating. You're like, oh my God, what did you think we were talking about for the last 4 or 5 minutes? Something as simple as, for my patients, they use the word alignment.
Right.
So when I'm talking about crowding, they're not exactly sure what I'm talking about, but they're just saying, to be polite. Now, if I say, well, talking about their alignment, and the orthodontist is going to address the alignment issues. So I think that might be some of it too, depending on where your patients are from or whatever they're trying to say. A lot of times they are not understanding it the way you understand it. Another example, the other day I took my dad for some testing, and I said something like, aren't we testing his face as well? And the neurologist literally laughed at me, no, that wouldn't help anyway. And I was like, okay. And I said, he said something like, no, but anyway, how would that help? Or how would that make a difference? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know what this test is versus that test, but my dad is having this issue and that issue. And so I thought we were here to address both. But clearly that's something that is normal in their world. It would be like us saying a bite wing and the parent going, I don't know what that means. Right. So are we talking technical jargon here that we're very comfortable with this and we're forgetting that our patients have no clue?
Right.
And I think that was a lot of it with this receptionist in my office. It would just repeat the same thing back. In this example, it would be like, well, how would that help anyway? But how would that help anyway? But how would that help anyway? And of course, a parent's going, you're missing it.
Yeah.
But she doesn't think she's the one missing it.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I think that's a lot of where, in another example in my office, we had a patient that came in once, wanted a second opinion on something. And so in his mind, he already knew what his kid needed. He knows, my kid has these 2 cavities. I know he's going to need this filling and this crown. I want to know how soon you can get it done and how much is it going to cost. And the assistant was going in circles. Well, what's your diet like? And this is how you brush better. And this is how you should floss better. And this is how this. And that's how that. And it's like he was just getting more and more agitated. She comes to me later. She's like, that dad was a jerk. And I'm like, so tell me about it. She tells me all about it. And I'm like, the way I see it, you were the problem. And she's like, what? Bad on me for not defending her. And I said, well, if he came in telling you this, then that's what you should be addressing by talking about diet. Well, I thought we were supposed to talk about all of that. Yeah, at some point it would be ideal, but you've got to have the audience that's ready to listen to that. He's not ready to listen about how he got in the boat. Right now he's trying to figure out how to get out of the boat. Then you can talk about how not to get him back in the boat, like some preventive measures. But he's already in it, and he recognizes he's in it. So he doesn't need to be told why he's in it. Don't beat the dead horse. He's already aware of that, doesn't care about that. But you got to listen to what he's saying. So she ended up with a very upset patient, but I'm like, but that's your fault because you weren't listening.
Right.
And then you missed every body language thing under the sun. So now your question to me a minute ago, though, was what can our staff do at that point? I think at that point, one, making sure, if you've asked if you've said something twice and now the patient's asking a third time, I think that's where you need to assume you are missing something.
Yeah.
Something is not, you are not understanding the patient. And so that might be where you might try repeating back and saying, wait, so you're wanting to know how your kid, or when your kid can be seen and how much this is going to cost. Because I bet you anything, she probably, if she had repeated back, she probably would have said, so you want to know, your kid has these cavities and how did these cavities happen? No. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, I know my kid has these cavities. When can we get them fixed? I need a date and I need a cost.
Yeah.
Oh. So I think just repeating back and paraphrasing if you can, to try to figure out, like, did you even understand the question right? And I feel like that's super helpful for me, like, even outside of the office, if I'm just kind of lost, and, I'll have, like, different family members that will kind of try to ask me a dental question, and we're going in circles, and they're answering the question for me before I can answer the question. My general dentist told me that I was going to need a root canal on this tooth, or it might have to be pulled. But, I mean, a root canal is where they would clean the nerve out, but then I wouldn't need another crown, would I? But why would I need a crown? And how would they? And I'm just like, okay, when did you get your dental degree? You know what I mean? Like, we're going in circles here. So I finally just started going, okay. So what is your question exactly?
Yeah.
Is your question, do you need the root canal? Is that what you're asking? Or are you asking, do you need a crown? So which part of that is it? And then they can come back and say, yeah, either one. Or, no, I know I need a root canal, but I'm confused on the crown part.
Right.
Okay, so you want to know, once the root canal is done, because the old me would have been like, well, this is where a root canal is, and this is the goal of the root canal. And then, of course, you've got to put a crown on that, and then and then we'd go in circles. But no, I shouldn't need. And I'm just like, I'm worn out.
Yeah.
And I can't yell at a family member. And you can't yell at your patients either. So I think that for me, it's really trying to go, what is the question here?
Mm-hmm. I think getting that clarification is huge. And again, we've taught on this a lot, but paraphrasing is so important. So let's say, okay, they've asked me the same question again. Red flag should be going off that, oh, wait, we're not communicating because they asked me the same question again. And then asking a clarifying question. So I think once you ask that clarifying question and you really listen to the answer, that's when we paraphrase. So like, for example, the one that you just used. So are you asking me about a root canal or are you asking me about a crown? That's a clarifying question. And then they come back with, oh no, I know I need the root canal. I'm wondering about the crown. Like, do I really have to have a crown after that? Then a paraphrasing response would say, so you're telling me you're committed to the root canal, but need to know whether you have to have a new crown or not. Is that correct? And then they're like, yeah, that's my question. You're like, oh, okay, now we're on the same page, and now we can kind of get to answering that question. And it actually does two things to settle the situation. Number one, it keeps you from spinning in circles and saying a bunch of stuff that is irrelevant to that patient, like the example you gave with your assistant. But second of all, it makes the patient feel heard. The fact that you slowed it down, you asked a question, and you may not understand after you ask that clarifying question. You may still not understand what the patient is saying. So you could easily, after they say their response and you're thinking in your mind, I'm still confused. It is totally appropriate to go, you know what? I want to make sure that I'm understanding you fully and completely. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions to make sure I understand what you're looking for. Is that okay? The patient's like, yes. Okay, great. Question. And then after you ask multiple questions, you're like, okay, now I get it. That's when you kind of group it all back together, paraphrase it, and go, is that correct? And you give the patient one more time to essentially say yes or no to that question. So to me, most angry patients are confused about something. They feel like they haven't been heard. They feel like they're talking and nobody's actually listening to them. And oftentimes that's so simple to solve if we'll just take a step back and really slow it down and think about it. I think about your person that you were sharing about, and it's so easy to just provide the answer. Oh, you listen to half the question. You're like, I know the answer to that. I'm going to go ahead and answer it. And I feel like when we get in that mode, like that question's so easy to answer, let me just go ahead and answer it. We just create this animosity between us and the patient that oftentimes they'll be like, I don't want to talk to her anymore. I want to talk to this person because I felt like she actually listened to me.
I was about to say the assuming. And I think that's the other thing. You kind of assume you know what they're asking. And sometimes I don't think that's a bad thing because you can seem like you're being helpful and that you're so knowledgeable that you know that this is what they're asking. But a lot of times if it's something where you can tell like this is something that seems a little bit, the patient is trying to verbalize something, let them finish talking. Let them finish. Give them a minute to finish. and this might seem like the opposite of that, and I don't think it is, but the other thing I was going to say is like preparation / common sense, maybe. If you know that the parent is going to be upset about insurance not covering the panoramic, and the parent comes in and they're like, well, I don't want this panoramic. And, part of you might assume that it's the cost. Mm-hmm. So you could kind of feel that out. So I think you should be prepared for thinking that they're going to be upset with the cost. So you better know how and why to justify it. Mm-hmm. But also, if it's not the cost and they are scared of the radiation, because we just had a pano last year at the orthodontist or whatever it may be, but you need to be knowledgeable about the panoramic so you can start or in our office, pano versus bite wings. Mm-hmm. A lot of times that conversation, they're like, no, you just took x-rays last time. And so I think a lot of times if you've got somebody who doesn't fully understand a procedure, like if you've got somebody new in your office and they don't know why you take the pano or what the point of the pano is. I mean, this is somebody we had in our office for years. She's been in our office, albeit she was new to dental in our office. She's only been in our office for about 3 years. But I said something about the panoramic used to track growth and development, something. And she was like, that is so good to know. Mm-hmm. And my jaw fell to the floor. I was like, how does this person not know why we take panos? Well, then is that bad on me for never explaining that?
Yeah.
Or maybe I use different verbiage, but then shouldn't it be on you to ask too? But it was like, oh my gosh, it could have been that easy. It could have been that easy for my front receptionist to know. And so that would be the next tip, would be some of it's common sense and preparation, like common sense that why would a patient be upset? Mm-hmm. Well, with the panoramic, it would be because there's radiation and there's cost. Mm-hmm. And then the third bucket is they don't really know what it is. Why would they be upset in our office about, like, if somebody comes in and is upset about fluoride, we should not be surprised. Oh, this person doesn't believe in fluoride? No, it happens so often. You need to be prepared for that.
Right.
You need to be prepared that they're going to ask you about a stainless steel crown. Yes, it is in the word. I mean, like, that's what it's called, stainless steel crown. And now we're surprised at the parents questioning it. Well, but we need to be prepared that they're going to ask those questions. Right. So, like, what are the common questions? I guess my point is training your team on things that are common things that you could anticipate being a question asked.
Absolutely. And even in a team training, taking the time to write down the most frequently asked questions and go, let's make a list of all of these, and then let's talk about our responses together. What should our response be to these questions? Because even just uniformity in how we answer those questions can be very calming for a patient to go, you know what, I called and asked this person the question and they said this. Well, then I had to call back the next day for a different question. I ended up asking my same question again, but I got a completely different answer. Well, that's frustrating to a patient as well. So just even having uniformity in those answers, and it allows us to be mentally prepared for them when they pop up. And we should never act surprised. I would say this is one other thing to throw in there is our body language can tone down, can de-escalate a situation.
Or escalate.
Or escalate it.
Yes.
And, if somebody's asking what we perceive to be a dumb question over and over again, and our face shows the frustration, we are escalating. Our body is escalating. It will inflame that scenario. So watching our face, watching even our distance. Sometimes when we get an angry patient, we'll back away to signal like, I want to disengage from this. Well, that's the exact wrong thing to do, right? Because that signals, well, now you don't care. You're backing away from me, or you're not looking at me. When we get uncomfortable, sometimes we want to turn away from a situation, but our body language can actually inflame that person. So controlling that, practicing with your team, an uncomfortable scenario, and what does our body language do in that moment to signal we're here, we're calm, we're comfortable in this conversation. It's not throwing me for a loop. I'm prepared for this. And I think when we can get that level, which takes a lot of thought and preparation, but I think when we can get that level of preparation in, we can actually de-escalate.
Okay, so what if you have a newer team member that is not equipped to do that? Then what do you do?
So one of the number one things that we tend to do with a new employee is tag out, right? Tag out. And I think that is a good strategy. I really do. I think we've got to be very careful with how we tag out. What we don't want to say is something like, well, I'm just going to have to get my manager for you to talk to. That is so annoying to a patient. Like, why can't you answer my questions? Now I know you're incompetent and I never need to deal with you again. So being able to phrase it slightly differently to go, you know what, you're asking some really great questions. I'm going to get our insurance expert up here, and she's phenomenal at answering these questions. Let me go get her. Would that be okay with you? Yes, please. That'll be awesome. So what we've done there is we've complimented the patient. You're asking some really great questions. Instead of calling the person the manager, which feels like we're escalating. Now, she very well could be the manager, but we've called her in that moment. You know what? Let me get so-and-so up here. She's the expert in insurance, and I have no doubt she's going to be able to answer your questions. Now it doesn't look like we're escalating it. It looks like we're just putting that person with the right specialist. And then the other thing that we did in that is we asked permission. Would that be okay with you? And so I think maybe in one of our episodes, I referenced this book. I've been doing a lot of training on Robert Cialdini's influence.
Persuasion.
Yes. The laws of persuasion, science of persuasion. And so what we do in that is we get consensus from that person, like, we're in this together, and then we get them to say yes. So the whole thing one of the things behind Robert Cialdini is you're getting an agreement from somebody. And when you get them to say yes, you've shown them honor, you've shown them respect, but then they're agreeing to that plan. Sometimes they don't want to tag anybody else in. They're like, no, I want you to answer my question, right? But if we were to phrase it that way and then just simply ask, would that be okay with you? It's a very customer service thing to do because you're giving them a choice in the matter. I think very few people, when you phrase it that way, you're getting them to the expert. Very few people are going to be like, no, I don't want to talk to her. I want to talk to you. They're going to be like, yes, thank you for actually acknowledging that I need an expert to answer my questions. And they'll say yes. Most of the time, I think it would be very rare to get a no. So that's a very honoring way for a new person to tag out. So if nothing else, let's say you got a new person on the team, teach them how to tag out in a way that doesn't minimize themselves and doesn't just make it feel like she's escalating the situation. We've also got to teach that person to remain calm.
So I'm going to wrap up our conversation here because you're getting right to, I think this is a perfect segue into a really good example, because I know we talked about our third part of this was going to be to use real life examples that we've had that you've seen in a client's office, a couple in mine, and tagging out when you really don't know the right answer. Yeah. But teeing your teammate up for success, because in this case, in the example that you're going to talk about in the next episode, is a receptionist and then the hygienist. And so it's really kind of a hygiene question. It would have been nice if the receptionist knew the answer, but she didn't, and that's okay. But she certainly missed a lot of the smoke signals, and now it got put on this hygienist then to have to snuff out the flames and then answer the question. And it could have been done far more effectively if the receptionist had caught a lot of these smoke signals before the flame even started.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to make everybody wait here a minute.
A week.
So, yeah, a week. So we just talked about, last episode we talked about the patient and how angry they can get. And today we talked a little bit more in detail about smoke signals and what to look for. And then stay tuned, because next week we're going to be back and we're going to talk about real examples and how all this can play out. So that way you have some real life tools and tips if you want to share with your team. This will be, because I think all of these examples, we've all had a variety of these same types of examples here. So that's coming up next week.
Stay tuned.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. We hope that you are comforted in knowing that you are not alone, but we also hope that you're walking away with some really great tips and tricks to try in your practice. We value your feedback, so please take a few moments to rate and review the podcast. Finally, we want to make sure that we're covering the topics that matter to you. So track us down on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what topics you want us to cover. As always, please know that we are rooting for you today as you manage your dental drama.